Welcome to the Virtual Memories Show. I'm your host, Gil Roth, and you're listening to a weekly podcast about books and life. Not necessarily in that order. You can subscribe to the Virtual Memories Show through iTunes or by plugging our RSS feed into your favorite podcatcher. You can find the RSS feed on our websites, vmspod.com or chimeraobscura.com/vm. We're also on Twitter and Instagram at VMSPod, at Facebook.com/virtualmemoriesshow, at virtualmemoriespodcast.tumblr.com, and on YouTube and TuneIn.com, where you can just search for Virtual Memories Show. And if you like this podcast, please go to the iTunes store, look up the Virtual Memories Show, and leave a rating and review for us. Maybe that'll inspire Apple to promote us a little bit. And, as always, you can promote us by telling people about the podcast on social media or however else you publicize the things you like. You can support the Virtual Memories Show and get access to exclusive content with a recurring monthly donation via Patreon. Just visit patreon.com/VMSpod and set up your level of support. You'll get new material from our patron-only blog, and you'll also get to listen to my quarterly bonus podcast, Fear of a Square Planet, which features extra material from our guests and is only available to supporters of the show. So visit patreon.com/VMSpod or paypal.me/VMSpod and help me continue to produce smart conversation about books, art, comics, and culture every week at the Virtual Memories Show. Last week, we left off on the mild cliffhanger of my having no guests lined up for this week's show. Lucky for me and you, something came together. On Tuesday, I went out to a panel hosted by the Grolier Club in honor of the science fiction exhibition that was curated by recent pod guest Henry Wessels. A bunch of past guests of the show were on the panel, in fact, Samuel Delaney, John Crowley, and Ellen Datlow. I pitched two of the other panelists, Christopher Brown and Siobhan Carroll, for later in the year. They're both out-of-towners, and I haven't read their work yet, although they did a great job on the panel. So, regardless, I did still manage to get a show lined up for this week, which is why we're here. See, one of the attendees at the event was past guest Jesse Sheidlower, and so while we were shooting the breeze, I realized that A, Jesse and I last recorded 5 years ago, and B, he's involved in a pretty neat project right now that I thought could make for a fun conversation. So, without letting on quite how desperate I was for a yes, I pitched him and we recorded this Saturday morning. Now, Jesse, you may or may not know, is a former editor at the Oxford English Dictionary, and he is the author of The F Word, a lexicographic history of the word fuck. It's phenomenal. It's everything you would expect. But that pretty neat project I mentioned is in another field completely. It's something called the Phantom Tollbooth. Jesse will explain what it is in the course of our conversation, but, well, just suffice to say, it fits into my mental model of like semi-quixotic projects that ask people to slow down a little and take in a special experience. You know, sort of like this podcast, except in Jesse's case, there's a lot more booze involved. I should add that Jesse is one of those past guests who has become a friend of mine over the years, and I'm awfully glad when that happens. We've stayed in touch and get together periodically when I'm going to be in the city. And in fact, after that science fiction panel last week, another past guest, Ellen Datlow, extended a standing invite for lunch since she enjoyed our conversation last summer. It's always rewarding to me because so much of my social interaction is, well, it's work-related, in which case it's centering around pharmaceutical manufacturing regulations and legislation, or it's in the very specific environment of recording a podcast. So it's nice talking to people when there are no mics or drugs on the table, as it were. Anyway, after recording with Jesse, I trekked up to the New York Antiquarian Book Fair on Saturday, where I got to catch up with a pal from college and scope out books that we will never, ever buy. And they had the super astronomically priced, like, medieval texts, but beyond that, they also had things like an original of Orwell's Inside the Whale essay collection, which is one of my all-time favorite pieces of writing, but not for $14,000. The problem was I was dressed pretty well that day, and the vendors thought that meant I was money. So I walked in and started looking at different books, and they would just glom onto me, ask about my interests, what sort of things I was looking for, with the expectation that I was actually going to drop $40 or $20 or $50,000 on a book. Next time, I will dress in the derelict collection and see how that goes. Now, my pal also told me he used to be in used and rare book dealing, and has heard that like tech bros are in this space now as collectors, and they are throwing money at modern first editions. So things like that Orwell book, or as he tells me, Ian Fleming James Bond first editions are just skyrocketing in price. It's kind of a weird phenomenon, but it's interesting to observe without feeling too much of a sense of loss, I guess. Anyway, at the fair, I did get to meet up with that recent podcast, Henry Wessels. He works for James Cummins Bookseller, and we got to shoot the breeze a little bit about the fair, about his exhibition at the Grolier and the panel. And in fact, he wants to maybe record a follow-up this summer when we're at the ReaderCon festival up in Boston. After this weekend's experience at the fair, have a lot of questions about the antiquarian book trade, so I'm hoping we can sit down and talk about that stuff, because that's how I roll. Anyway, I should shut up now. As far as caveats go, we recorded at Jesse's apartment. There's a bit of an echo there, but you'll deal. The other caveat is the Threesome Tollbooth is a bartending experience and a curated cocktail thing. And as some of you may know, I haven't had a drink since 2012. It's not any sort of bottoming out AA type thing, just health reasons. But anything we're talking about when it comes to booze, keep in mind that I haven't had a drink in 6 years when we're having this conversation. Anyway, here's Jesse's Twitter bio, since the bio on his website is both really extensive and maybe a little out of date. Porphyra comic lexicographer and Threesome Tollbooth cocktailist. Past president, American Dialect Society, XOED, the F Word, barbells, cooking, motorcycles, Pearl, and Python. And now, the 2018 Virtual Memories Conversation with Jesse Sheidlower. So tell me about the Tollbooth. Tell me about the Threesome Tollbooth. What is it, and what's your involvement with it? What is it all?
You're starting with the big ones. You're supposed to be more narrow.
It's either that or I ask about the new bookshelves. But, I thought we'd start with, that Tollbooth, and we'll move over to the Phantom Tollbooth after.
Okay. The Threesome Tollbooth is an extremely small bar. It is perhaps the smallest bar in the world, perhaps New York. We don't actually care about this kind of thing. We've never measured it because we don't want to say, oh, well, it's this many inches and someone will build one that's half an inch shorter, because that's not what it's about. It's about an intimate space where you can have a great cocktail experience, and it's something that we'd been thinking about for many years before we finally got it going.
Is it the royal we?
Yes, there are two of us involved. Okay. My colleague N.D. Austin, who is perhaps best known for the Night Heron, which was the water tower built into the Speakeasy in Chelsea, which was 5 years ago. And that's, in fact, the first project that I worked with him on. I was one of the bartenders of that.
How'd you guys meet?
We met through a mutual friend. I frequently host these experiences where there will be some weird immersive thing going on, or speakeasies, or something that you can't quite figure out how to categorize it. And this was one where it was set up at a recently abandoned couples, like a swingers motel in the Poconos, that had been very big in the 1970s and progressively gone downhill and finally gone under. And there was still enough of it together that he was able to assemble an actual event there. So, with a band and everyone getting their own room for a couple of hours, and bussing people out from New York to there, and it was just incredibly cool. And I thought, I love the idea of doing stuff like this. I want to be a part of this.
And who had the idea for the bar, for this Threesome Tollbooth? Or how did it evolve between the two of you?
In general, he's the one who makes all the big decisions about this, and he's certainly the one who builds it all. But we'd been wanting to do things like this for a while, so we've done a number of speakeasies. And when we say speakeasies, we mean speakeasies. A thing that bothers us in general is the use of speakeasy to refer to just any kind of dark bar, or a bar with no obvious signage or things like that. I mean, a speakeasy is an illegal bar. If we're doing a speakeasy, it means we're breaking into a space, building something there, running it for 1 weekend or 2 weekends or something like that, and then going away and never coming back. It doesn't mean that we have a completely legal bar where we just don't hang a sign out front, which is the case for the toll booth. We don't have a sign, but we do not refer to it. It's not a speakeasy. Yeah. So when we do speakeasies, we go through a lot of effort to have it be an attractive space and to do the cocktails well. So we will bring glasses to these things, actual glasses, not disposable cups. And we will have a very good cocktail, but there will probably be only one, because when you're dealing with stuff like this, you're talking about carrying a 50-pound bag of ice up 15 flights of stairs in the dark, or carrying a case of whiskey across a half mile of train tracks in the mud, and there's no running water. And you can't have an elaborate range of cocktails with anything that anyone might want to have. Even having just one is hard enough to do it right. So we were always wanting to do something where we could have it be a real cocktail experience, where we really were having a wide range of cocktails and doing it nicely and with really great glassware, and doing something unusual. I mean, there are a million bars out there that do different things, and just having another one that we think, okay, this is better, that wasn't enough. We'd been thinking for a while about things we could do that would be genuinely interesting. And he had an event. There was a couple of some celebrity who had attended some of the speakeasies before, and they asked, the husband had asked if we could do something special, if he could do something special for them. And he put together an event that was, in fact, in a real abandoned toll booth, somewhere in the Northeast. And he brought in a whole bunch of alcohol and a whole bunch of glassware and had this special event just for the two of them. And it went over extremely well. And doing something like that, we have also had other things where we bring a bar in a suitcase, the glassware and so forth in a suitcase, and have it in an actual closet, in just an extremely, like, sitting on the floor of a closet and making a couple of drinks there with, no light or candlelight. And doing something like that is something that we thought, this could work really well. This is what we should shoot for. And it took a long time to find the right space, because it needed to be, first of all, in an existing bar that had a liquor license. There's no practical way to get it for just, for the smallness of what we were talking about, and also be the right kind of space. And he's extremely good at finding things like this. And, he found good space that was, in a restaurant owned by someone that he'd been friends with for a long time, and spent, quite some time building it out. And we had our space.
And there's no photography or anything?
There's no photography allowed at all. We don't have photographs of the space ourselves. Mm-hmm. And it's something that even if we allowed it, it doesn't photograph well, because you really, even with a wide-angle lens, you can't get the sense of what it's like inside.
Mm-hmm. What's the clientele like?
It varies, and it's changed a bit over time. I mean, when we started, it was just word of mouth. So when we had the Night Heron, the water
then you
tower,
ended up in the New Yorker, which always bums me out when anybody I'm pals with ends up in the New Yorker, because it's just a sign of, how little I've accomplished in life. But anyway, go on. When we started, we were mainly going from the Night Heron mailing list. So so the Night Heron, in general, the speakeasies, no one knows about them until after they're over. Usually they don't know about them ever. We don't talk about them. We don't publicize them. But the Night Heron he did invite press in for the last few weeks, and with the explicit understanding that they couldn't write about it until it was closed. And there was one other speakeasy event that we had that a New York Times writer covered fairly thoroughly. And people found out about these afterwards and thought, this is so cool, this is really interesting, I'd love to be involved in this. And we had a mailing list set up that was running for 4 years without ever having anything sent to it, because the events we do are not for the public. Like when we have the speakeasies, they're for people we already know. They're people who are part of the underground community, people who have helped us with things, people who are building things of their own. It's not just random people who can come along. Mm-hmm. So all of the civilians who had been on the Night Heron mailing list were waiting for years for anything to happen. So when we started the toll booth, we reached out to that, and everyone was coming from that or by word of mouth. So the first number of months we were open, we asked people not to post anything on social media, and we didn't let the press in. So the initial crowd for the first number of months was a much higher concentration of, let's say, Brooklyn arty types, along with a wide variety of other people. I mean, when it was written up in the New Yorker or the New York Times, obviously a lot of people got on the mailing list who were not part of our regular circle.
but it was predominantly a more arty crowd. After a number of, we opened in April, and we had what we considered a soft opening for a while. Again, no press, no social media. And we took August off because it's just too hot. No one's around. Didn't feel like it. Needed to travel a bit ourselves. And in September, we said, okay, I think, we've got it down. We're ready to open. And at that point, we invited the press. And again, a bunch of high-profile places, including the New Yorker, came and wrote about us. And it got even more crowded very quickly. And now the range is much wider. So there will be, we have tourists, some from out of the country. We have people from all branches of New York. There's still a very large concentration of Brooklyn arty types, but people from all over now.
Mm-hmm. And literally just bartender and two patrons.
It is exactly large enough for one bartender and two people. There is no possible, and the two people are sitting very close together. And we discuss things like this at length in our FAQ, because we don't want anyone to be
under a misimpression of.
Yes, well, and in particular, we're concerned about people who are claustrophobic. Now, in fact, and that's something that almost everyone asks about this. How do you deal with people who are claustrophobic? Well, the answer is we warn them about it if we can.
And we get them drunk.
And yes, and a little bit of alcohol does help to relax you. But the space itself, while it is extremely small, it doesn't feel that small. Like when you first walk in, I love when people walk in, they always start to giggle. Everyone, they smile, they laugh, they giggle when they see it. And that lasts for a couple of minutes as they're getting adjusted. And it does look very small when you first walk in, but when you're sitting down and everything is in place and the door is closed and the lights are how they are. So, there's a light in the ceiling. There are side panel lights in there. So, and the ceiling is a bit high, and from where you're sitting, you don't actually see it. So it doesn't feel like you're enclosed. You don't feel pressed in by it. In fact, you feel like even though it's small and you can't move from side to side, the ceiling is kind of out of reach, and light, and there are lights on the side. We haven't had any problems. I have a friend who's claustrophobic, and I invite her down every now and then just to make sure, like when we make changes, like it still feels okay. Yes, it feels fine. We've never had a problem with someone being uncomfortable for more than a couple of minutes, even if they identify as claustrophobic when they come in.
Mm-hmm. Do you get into character?
I don't. So one of the interesting things that happened when we first started, so I had said that we asked people not to post anything on social media. Someone, of course, quickly ignored that and posted about us to a mailing list devoted to immersive theater. Mm-hmm. And we got a lot of people coming in from that mention. And we always ask, how did you find out about us? I mean, now it's, a friend of mine was here, or I read about it in the Times or something like that. But initially it was very interesting to find out how they came, and a lot of word of mouth, a lot of Night Heron mailing list, things like that. But a number of people came in from this list, and even though the bit that was referenced made it very clear, like this is a very small cocktail bar, people thought that we were an immersive performance. Mm-hmm. And they wanted to know what the play was, what was happening, what we're doing. Yeah. And some of them, a very small number, but some people didn't actually like cocktails. Like, well, why are you here? So, well, I thought this is this isn't actually a show. This is a cocktail bar.
It's not an appendix of Sleep No More.
I'm a bartender. My name is Jesse. I'm not an actor. And some people were a little bit disappointed. So I will say there are performative aspects of this, as with most things we do. And one thing that we deliberately try to do is the initial few minutes is a little bit disorienting. You're not exactly sure where you're going. You're not exactly sure what's going to happen. And the details of this are things that we prefer not to talk about. Mm-hmm. And we ask if people are writing about it or telling their friends, don't mention these parts because
I will not ask. Okay.
No, well, you can ask, but we want things to be a bit surprising. Yeah. And in fact, a little bit uncomfortable at first because we find that for events of this sort, it's not a regular cocktail bar, just like the things we do. Even the speakeasies, even if you know that it's going to be a speakeasy, you don't know where it is or precisely what's going to happen. And having people be a little bit nervous or unsure of that's actually a good thing, because nothing dangerous, nothing bad happens, but having them wonder is a good thing. But in fact, yes, nonetheless, despite these performative aspects, it's not a performance. It is a bar. We serve cocktails. I make drinks, and I am not in character. I am myself. And someone did ask us, actually, it was an early couple, a couple of artists. One was an artist from California, and her partner was based in New York, and they came, and she asked me at some point after they had been there for a while, are you Jesse? And it took me a second to figure out what she was actually asking. But yeah, eventually I realized, no, she was asking, what, am I in character? And I said, well, no, I am Jesse. I'm not anyone else. Like, this is who I am. I may behave slightly differently in this role than I would if I just met someone in the street, but nonetheless, I'm not playing a different person. I'm not playing a role. I'm not an actor. And in fact, that is something that is relevant to the experience because there are only the two of us there. We bartend we alternate nights. And when you go there, you'll have a different experience depending on who you have as your bartender. My personality is very different from Andy Austin's. We have slightly different drink preferences, so we might make things differently. And certainly the way that the conversation will work or the kind of things that will happen will be different just because we're different people and we are doing this. We are our own people. Like, again, it's not a scripted thing. He's more likely to pull out a guitar and play a song. I'm more likely to get into a very long conversation about the history of some particular unusual liqueur. And that's just how it is.
What's your cocktail history? Like, when did you first discover your fetish for cocktails?
Well, I'd always been interested in food and wine, and it was something that I tried learning about from a very young age.
Were you mixing drinks for your parents when you were like a little kid?
No, I never did anything like that. My parents didn't drink very much. But it was something that I was interested in and something that I tried to learn about. I have never worked in a bar in any sort of real professional role. People often ask that. I did work... I spent a few months. I was the first cocktail critic for Time Out New York when they opened in the mid-'90s. So I wrote up articles on martini bars in New York and wine things and things about how to order certain cocktails and where to go for the best one and so forth. At a time when the cocktail scene in New York was really not that impressive. But again, I never had any professional training in it. I would love to know more. I mean, I read what I can. I taste everything I can. I try to learn as much as I can, but I know that there's a lot more I have to learn, and it would be better if I worked in a real, in a high pressure bar, doing a wide range of stuff as opposed to just what we feel like, which is kind of what we do now. Mm-hmm. But we think we do a pretty good job at it nonetheless.
What are the attributes of a good regular bar experience for you, as opposed to the Threesome Tollbooth, which is a specialty vibe? What do you look for, I guess, in a good bar?
Well, people often ask, what are your favorite bars in New York? Where do you recommend? I like classic cocktails or classically based cocktails. So the kind of bars I like will be good at that sort of thing. They will probably have their own. It won't all just be a menu of the greatest things from the 1950s, although if they have very classic cocktails like martinis and Manhattans and old fashions and things like that, they will be properly made and not our interpretation of this. Like, you don't need to reinterpret drinks that have been perfect for 80 years. If I want to order a classic cocktail, I want a classic cocktail. I don't want someone else's version of that. So the kind of bars I like will be good at that kind of thing. There are a lot of bars that do experimental or innovative things, and I like the idea of experimentation and innovation, but in general, bars of this sort are not my favorite. Like, I usually find that I don't really like the kind of drinks that these places make. And it's unfortunate because this is where a lot of the action is now. Like, everyone's interested in, there's a new place and they're doing all this crazy stuff, and these drinks have 17 ingredients. And
I would say liquid nitrogen, but that's literally like 15 years ago when I first came across that in a bar. So
there are still places doing stuff like that, but even for forgetting about the scientific, the techie kind of thing, which a lot of places do. You'll see places where drinks have a very large number of ingredients, and many of the ingredients are things you've never heard of or things that are not traditional beer in a cocktail, or many savory ingredients, or tea or sherry or things like this, which can make terrific things. And again, I love the idea of experimentation, but in practice, I tend not to like a lot of things that these bars make. So places I like will be doing, very classic cocktails, or will be doing I would never criticize something by name. I praise things by name, but Amore Amargo is perhaps my favorite cocktail bar in New York. This is on 6th Street, and they focus entirely on bitters. They have a tremendous variety of Italian Amari. They have hundreds of different cocktail bitters, and everything they do is made with some variety of bitters. And they, including reinterpretations of classic drinks, but in this case, it's not trying to be, a something or other made better. It's a genuine reinterpretation of it, which I think is okay. And even though most things there are not, traditional cocktails, they are, they're very specific about what they're doing, and they're made in a really interesting way. And the bartender is a genius and knows how to make new things and interesting variations on things. And so this is an exception to like doing weird stuff. I totally love the place.
And when it comes to serving at the toll booth, how much of it is patron order versus your decision on what they should be drinking?
Well, we don't have a menu at all. We always ask people what they like. Well, we ask people first what they don't like.
That's easier.
Is there anything you're allergic to? Is there anything you strongly dislike? And how they answer that is also, even if they don't say anything positive, it's also very indicative, because a lot of people will say, I like everything. Some people really will have some specific thing, or they're allergic to nuts, or they really don't like absinthe or licorice, they'll say. And sometimes it's clear that they really do. I mean, many people really do dislike these things. Some people say they don't like things, but you can sort of tell that they don't really dislike it. They just don't like that being the focus of things, or they've never had something the right way. And occasionally I will say, well, would it be okay if I tried something out that uses this thing that you say, because I think I can do something interesting for you. Again, there's no menu. You're paying for the experience, not for individual drinks. If you don't like something, I make you something else. So there's no danger in my giving something a try, because if you don't like it, fine, put that away, make you something else that is exactly what you say you want. And very often we find that things that people wouldn't order because they think they dislike it, or because it has an ingredient they think they don't like, or because they think it sounds too plain, very often they really will like these things. And there's one, for example, we're not making too much in the winter, but in the warmer months, we do make a version of a daiquiri. And it is, in fact, a historical version. It's not a modern interpretation. It is a historical version. And a daiquiri is a fascinating cocktail because it is, in fact, one of the great classic cocktails, and no one has ever had it, because they all think that a daiquiri is this frozen, slushy, sweet thing, overly sweetened thing that they get in a mediocre Mexican restaurant. And in fact, a classic daiquiri, 3-ingredient cocktail, rum, lime juice, simple syrup. It is a great cocktail. It is an almost perfect cocktail. And again, no one's ever had it. If you saw a daiquiri on a menu, you wouldn't order it. Because there are places that have Hemingway daiquiris, or again, updated versions, but it's not something widely ordered. So we do a historical version, the daiquiri number 4, which is just replacing the simple syrup with maraschino liqueur. So still 3-ingredient cocktail, still rum plus sour plus sweet. And it's a fantastic drink. And again, you wouldn't order if it were on a menu. You would think, this just doesn't sound interesting at all. And people are blown away by how great it is. They love this. And I love making it for them, because if you tell people beforehand what they're having, they look upset and bored. Yeah. And they're like, oh my God, this is incredible. This is fantastic. And it's not fantastic because I'm some genius bartender. It's fantastic because this is a great drink. So we like doing things like that.
I was going to ask you, do you experiment at all, or is it really just the experimenting by going back to the classics?
Oh, no, we experiment all the time.
Yeah.
We try to base our experimentation on classic principles, where things will be relatively balanced, and there's not going to be any one super predominating flavor, and there aren't going to be a wide variety of crazy things you've never heard of. So even if we get some new ingredient that we're excited about, we'll try to think, how does this fit into to existing things, to things that we already know about and like? How can we take that into a different direction with this without going completely nuts?
Have you made something that you couldn't remember how you made and were unable to replicate?
That does happen from time to time. We try now to remember these things or write them down as we're doing it if we think it's really going to be something that might work. But there are a lot of templates for cocktails that work extremely well. So you can make Negroni variants that have some kind of, that have gin. Negroni is traditionally gin, Campari, and sweet vermouth. But there are a million kinds of sweet vermouth, and they have radically different flavor profiles. And there are a lot of other Amari than Campari. And you can make something with, and gins have a wide variety of flavors. So, gin, Amaro, and vermouth, you can do 100 cocktails that will taste completely different. And again, it's on the menu at Amore Amargo, Negroni variant. Yeah. And you can go so far with just that one, like equal quantities of 3 different things and, have 100 different cocktails that taste radically different, just in that one thing. And this is something that people write about. Well, we already have Little Branch. Why do we need another classic kind of cocktail place in New York? It's like, well, because they're great. The fact that, like a sour template, again, some liquor, some citrus, and some sweet thing, like the fact that this is a very old template and there are a lot of cocktails based on this, including the daiquiri, it doesn't mean that we need to go somewhere else. It means that this is a fantastic thing to explore further.
Do you see parallels between your analysis and your practice within bartending and the lexicographic work you've done over the years? In terms of seeing these things as a language and understanding parameters and rules for them? I'm wondering if you see, any sort of analog or parallel between your earlier career and what you're doing with this.
Probably not. I mean, one could reach for certain things, but it's not.
It seemed out of. It didn't seem apparent to me. I just wasn't sure if you've spent long nights looking up at the ceiling, wondering how does this possibly tie into how I.
Well, I think the most important thing for developing cocktails, and this is going to sound
grandiose.
No, the opposite. It's going to sound stupid or obvious. You really you have to taste things, and this is something that people rarely do. You decide you like a certain kind of spirit and, okay, I like gin, I like bourbon, I like rye, or I like this particular brand. And then you just have that all the time because you like it. You really have to try these things. And even when you think you know what things are like or how things are going to work in combinations, you have to try them again. Because they will mix in ways that you didn't expect, even if you're very experienced at it. So one reason why good bars, like you'll have several different gin-based drinks using different kinds of gin. It's not because different gin manufacturers are paying you off or whatever. It's because different gins taste differently and they work differently in different cocktails. So to take one example, we have a cocktail that we make. Despite not having a menu, there are things that we make very regularly. So depending on the season, depending on the circumstance, there will be things that we will make very often. Sure. So a cocktail that we developed very early is something that includes a bit of mezcal in it, which we use primarily in many cases when we use mezcal. It's not as a base spirit. It's a smaller amount in addition because we like the smokiness. So this cocktail has some, and we used a moderately priced mezcal, and we ran out. We weren't paying attention. We ran out of it. Our supplier didn't have any more, and it's a cocktail that we wanted to keep making, and we just needed to have some mezcal. So on the way to the bar, I just stopped at a liquor store near here, bought a bottle of some expensive artisanal mezcal that I'd never heard of, and was using that for a week or so. And then we got the original stuff back in, and I got together with my partner, and we had a tasting, and we tried both of them, and we agreed without question, the fancy one, the expensive one, it was more complex, it was more subtle, it was more interesting. And the other one, it wasn't bad. It wasn't a cheap one. It was a moderately priced one. It was very good, but the artisanal one was better. And then we mixed it into the drink that we were using it for, and there was no question at all that the cheaper one was better in this drink. Yeah. Like all of the subtlety, the complexity, you couldn't taste that anymore by the time you added the other ingredients. And this is not, I'm not using this in a negative way, the sort of the harshness, and again, that's the wrong word, but the aspects of the less expensive ones that were less subtle came through in ways that really made the drink shine. And the fancy one didn't have that.
Yeah. And that'll happen in general. Yeah, with my wife does a lot of cooking, and the more subtle things can be lost in the mix.
Right. Yes. Now, of course, there are ways of working with that as well. I mean, you can make a cocktail where the important thing is, in fact, the flavor of the mezcal, and other things are just heightening that or playing off that, in which case the fancy one would have been better. But in this cocktail, it was not better. And tasting any kind of thing, like people don't do it. And by tasting, I mean actually sitting down with a bunch of things to compare it to and having a tasting. I don't mean saying, well, I'm interested in what this thing tastes like, I will have it. You really have to taste things with other things of their class. And I don't care, have a butter tasting. I mean, you'll spend $15, get together with 5 friends, taste 5, get some supermarket butter, get some fancy supermarket butter, get some fancy imported thing from France. Try a bunch of things, and you'll be amazed at how broad the range of these things can be. And that's the way to learn about anything, but especially with cocktails. Like if you're interested in what rye tastes like, get 5 bottles of rye. What's your favorite rye cocktail? Well, get the other elements of that, and have a field day.
People ask for recipes. Your customers, I mean.
They do, and we will tell them. I mean, again, we're not secretive about this, and we very often we make drinks that other people have developed, and we say, well, this is from this restaurant in Seattle, and we think it's a great cocktail. The idea of having a classic cocktail that we're going to change because we don't want to copy, like if it's a good drink, we make the drink.
Yeah.
And if it's a good drink, people will like it. They won't like it better because it's not only good but different. I mean, maybe they will. Maybe some people will. And sure, you do want to go to places that are doing things you haven't tried before. But it's very easy for us to make things that people haven't tried before, even if they're pretty experienced. And if people have come up with great drinks, we're very happy to serve those.
Repeat customers?
Actually, yes, pretty often.
Yeah.
It took a while for that to happen, but there are a number of people who come back, either because they like the experience or they want to show it to other people, or they just genuinely like the cocktails. And we try to do, at first we didn't really write down what people were having, but now we make an effort to write down what we serve for people. So when they come back, we can say, okay, well, we know you had this time. Did you like this? Did you like that? We can remake that. We can go in a totally different direction. And people really appreciate that.
Any way to get people's phones off of them when they're in there? Or is that part of the stuff you don't want to talk about in terms of leading people into the experience?
No, it's actually totally fine. We don't have, we have a rule against photographs. We don't have a rule against phones. We don't say anything about it, but they are allowed. If people ask, we'll say they're allowed. Almost everyone spontaneously shuts off their phone. They leave it outside.
Yes, I wondered if they get that's part of why they're there.
They keep it in their pocket. If it rings or if it buzzes, they apologize and shut it off. Again, it's fine with us. I mean, one thing that we try to be clear about, I mean, they're not here for us. We're here for them. If they want to spend the entire time drinking cocktails and chatting with people on their phone, on their phones, that's fine with us. Again, like they don't have to look at us. They don't have to interact with us. Now, in practice, that never happens. I mean, once or twice or 3 times in the entire time we've been doing it has someone pretty much stayed on their phone the whole time, or even for that matter, had a conversation between themselves to ignore the fact that I'm standing 2 feet away from them. They could, they're more than welcome to, but in general, they don't. They're there for the entire experience and not just to have interesting cocktails while they're telling people about it on Twitter.
Yeah, I'm coming up with some confession booth thing, but luckily neither of us are Catholic, so we don't have any sort of context for that.
Well, not personally, but many people talk about this.
Yeah.
And in fact, it is not unusual for people to come in and immediately say something confessional, or perhaps after a couple of drinks to say something confessional. And I can't repeat any of this because, in fact, we do believe in the sanctity of the bartender-patron relationship. And if people say things, that's not something I'm going to repeat. And and people should know that they're safe talking about personal things. But yes, people will confess things or say things that they might not in other circumstances, perhaps because of the intimacy or because it feels like a confessional.
And the association with the Phantom Tollbooth, which I know is one of your favorite books.
It's complete chance.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously we knew about the Phantom Tollbooth. When we were thinking of the name, it really wasn't in our minds at all. It was based, as I mentioned, on this experience with an actual toll booth. It is very small, like a toll booth. And the fact that the Phantom Tollbooth is a magical thing that takes you to, have unusual experiences is just chance, as is another complete chance. Our booking system is known as TOC. And that's
one of the
characters in the Phantom Tollbooth, which was completely unplanned, in fact, unrealized by someone said, TOC, like, oh yeah, I just never even thought of that.
And eventually we can try and get Jules Pfeiffer out here to attend.
That would be lovely.
I think he comes in from Long Island sometimes. So
we do actually have a copy inside the toll booth. Mm-hmm. And by the way, something else that an unusual thing that never happens. People don't spend time on their phones. People don't spend time having intimate conversations with themselves. To my great surprise, no one ever awkwardly makes threesome jokes.
I was wondering, but I thought it would be tasteless to ask. But yeah, the threesome toll booth would seem to imply.
It could suggest that,
yeah.
And we're in fact the first or second line in our FAQ is this some kind of a sex party? So, no, we're a cocktail bar. We serve cocktails. Period. But I am nonetheless surprised that people don't come in and make some kind of threesome joke. But it almost never happens. It's so rare that anyone even acknowledges the fact that this is part of the name.
Mm-hmm. Has anyone had sex in there while you've been bartending?
Not to my knowledge. There are occasions when people
there'll be a twosome toll booth. That's. Yeah.
There have been times when people have looked like they're being a little bit amorous, and we can, on occasion, I need to get something from the back, and turn the lights down for a bit and give them 5 minutes or something. But I don't.
I thought you were pouring saltpeter in with their cocktails instead to try to diffuse things.
No, I don't know that anyone has actually had sex inside the toll booth.
Good to know. So to get to the other question that I've been dying to ask, the first time you were on was 2013, so it's been a pretty long span as far as my life has changed. The biggest change I could see in yours is that you now have bookshelves built in here in the apartment. Did you have to start culling books at all as part of building in shelves?
Quite the opposite. I actually gained space in the process, which I'm very happy about, and I'm trying extremely hard not to take immediate advantage of.
You're almost at 100%. I have to tell you, it's almost maxed out already.
Well, it looks that way, but in fact, there's a lot of scope in there. They're not packed too tightly, and there's
and then there's the ones laid on top. So the horizontal, you'll get to that stage pretty quick, too.
Well, so in my previous bookcases, I had IKEA Billy bookcases, which.
They work. That's why they're there.
They work very well. So I started off like when I first moved in, I didn't have the money or the opportunity to have real bookcases. So I just got the IKEA Billy bookcases, and they were fine, but they're not adjustable enough. So in fact, I found myself with a lot of horizontal room for horizontal storage on many shelves, and I did, and it didn't look great because having a complete mix of regularly stacked books and then horizontal ones jammed in there, it was not ideal. Mm-hmm. So here I was able to build them exactly the way I wanted them. So there are some larger shelves, but mostly everything is the same height. And I was able to get an entire extra shelf in by cutting out that extra vertical space. So I have more storage, and I don't have to have things horizontally.
Was there a degree, and maybe I'm projecting because this is what I went through, once the first shelf started to come in, that you realized this is the one thing you've wanted your entire goddamned life is just to have the bookshelves built into your house?
I absolutely knew.
You knew that in advance? I did not understand that about myself before we finally got them installed.
No, I knew that from the very start. I had a pretty good idea of what I wanted. And in fact, some friends were saying, it looks totally fine with the IKEA ones. I mean, they're completely full and they take up the entire wall. So it's not like you can see the side of it with the particle board hanging out. Like you don't need to bother. And it's like, they still look, they're fine, but they still look like cheap bookcases, and they do a great job, but it's not what I want. And so when I finally got these installed, it's like, oh my God, first of all, I'm just so ecstatic about how they are. But even those friends who were being a bit skeptical about it said, you know what, you're right. This really is so much better.
Yeah, because it looks like your books have multiplied immensely, and that's, I'm sure, from going all the way up to the ceiling now. We'll put a couple of pictures of this in the show notes if you're okay with that. Of course. So, Is there a shelf maker you want to plug, by the way? Was there a company you went with?
Well, absolutely. These shelves are made by a system called Rakks, R-A-K-K-S. American manufacturers, a lot of variety, a lot of opportunities for customizing things, different styles, and the shelves were. My dealer here was an operation called Shelf Shop Guy, and the guy who runs it, whose name is in fact Guy, is terrific. And a friend of mine had him. A friend of mine who's a literature PhD. Had an entire wall of bookcases from him, and she was saying, like, he's the best and the shelves are fantastic. I recommend it so highly. So I'd spoken to him once or twice over the years when I was trying to figure out if I could afford it, and he was very patient, and finally I pulled the trigger, and he was great to work with, and I recommend him highly.
Now that you have that sweet, sweet threesome Tollbooth money coming in. Well, I know it's not there for that. Well, it's the same thing people ask about this and monetization of your podcast. Yeah. So other things are more important, I'm sure. The other, well, and this is just shelf weirdness question. The cookbooks are so different in dimension, A, from one to the next, and B, from the regular fiction and other reference books you have. How much planning went into figuring out what's going where and what the heights were going to be so you're not wasting space? And I know this is a really weird and esoteric question, but I know also to the two of us it's critically important.
Oh, no, it's extremely important. In fact, I did a moderate amount of thinking and realized, and a little bit of measuring, and realized that it was going to work out fine. Because, I suppose I could have done this in a way where I really did measure everything incredibly carefully and everything fits in exactly. So I have, 9-inch shelves and 10-inch shelves and 12-inch shelves. But that would be an organizational nightmare. I would have had to shelve things by height. Like, people... You
by
see
color,
pictures,
or you didn't do the turning the books
reverse
around
thing. Oh my God, this makes me physically ill. But doing it by color, and I admit I've seen people who've done that, and I've seen pictures. It's actually kind of striking. Yeah. But this is also it's an aesthetic thing that it's insane. It might be striking, but it's still crazy. So I was not going to reorganize everything just to squeeze a few extra centimeters of space in by doing it that way. The average height of the shelves is something large enough for most books, and the top and bottom shelves are larger, so the large cookbooks can fit either on the top or the bottom and go all the way, as opposed to the regular bookcases where I might not have as many books that are that large, but so they're just an inch or two short. That's totally fine. So it worked out fine for the cookbooks to be on those places where they needed it.
Yeah, it's that and the art books at home that becomes I have a few shelves that are much taller, right. But then it becomes these are art books and these are oversized comics collections, and do I dare mix them? Yeah, so we run into these problems of our own creation, I suppose.
I am looking forward to getting. I spec'd out the entire apartment, but I only built in the living room for now, which is still very large, but. I hope in the near future to be able to do my guest room and my bedroom as well, because there I do have books, again, stacked all the way to the ceiling in IKEA bookcases, and I would love to replace those as well.
Yeah, see, I've got a couple still left in the garage, and that's where the secondary books and the things I know I'm never going to, but I don't want to throw out.
I do have a wide variety of books. Well, not a wide variety, but I have a few boxes of things in storage in the basement that... I would very much like to have out, but I'm certainly not ready to get rid of.
Yeah, understood. Last question. Do you have friends who were customers at the toll booth? And I mean people you become friends with through the toll booth.
Yes, there are a few that I've become friendly with. It's nice. I mean, it's a close experience. Yeah. And you really do get to know people, and there are a lot of terrific people that come through. I mean, everyone has been great, I have to say. I mean, people ask all the, what's the craziest thing that's happened, or has anyone been really horrible? It's like, actually, no one's been really horrible. I mean, the worst that happens is that people are very quiet, and again, give them a few drinks, and that usually changes. But no one's done anything really horrible. No one's gotten unpleasantly drunk. No one's been rude. And this is true across the board for, different kinds of people. Like, you get all like, Upper East Side bankers in and they must be horrible. It's like, actually, no, they're pretty, like, they're excited to be there too. Like, it's not
I figure if they're going to that effort, it's not a status thing at that point.
So I've enjoyed almost everyone I've met there, and there are a few that I've become friends with.
Awesome. Jesse, thanks so much for coming back on the show.
Well, thanks for having me back.
And that was Jesse Sheidlower. His Twitter handle is Jesse Sheidlower, which is JESSESHEIDLOWER. His website is Jesse's Word, or Jesse's Sword, depending on how you want to break that one out. You can find out more about the Threesome Tollbooth at threesometollbooth.com. You can also look up write-ups about it in the New Yorker and the New York Times. Oh, and you should pick up Jesse's book, The F Word, which is a history of the F word. Now, once we wrapped up the main session, I asked Jesse, so, who you reading? He burst out laughing when I asked him that because he hasn't had time to read anything. But he did talk about the books that are on his to-do list. So if you want to hear his answers, you'll need to become a supporter of the Virtual Memories Show so you can get access to our quarterly bonus podcast, Fear of a Square Planet. The newest episode of that one went up a little while ago, and it features new material from Shannon Wheeler, Barry Blitt, Martin Rosen, Nicholas Delbanco, Eshkol Nevo, Paul Gravett, Eddie Portnoy, Vanda Kreft, and Cullen Murphy. You can support the Virtual Memories Show via patreon.com/VMSpod or paypal.me/VMSpod. And there are all sorts of goals and goodies in place for patrons, including that bonus podcast, patron-only blog, handwritten show notes for every episode, my new secret project, which I swear I'll get back to, and more. So go to patreon.com/VMSpod and support the art of fine conversation. We recorded this episode at Jesse's home in New York City. I had the toll at the GW, but weekend parking is pretty cheap with the garage by his place, so the whole shebang only cost about $24 Still, if you want to help defray some of the costs of the Virtual Memories Show, like web hosting, travel, equipment, coffee, or if you just want to toss some money to my way because you think the show is worth it, then visit patreon.com/VMSpod or paypal.me/VMSpod and make a one-time or recurring donation. A special thanks go out to John Wendler, Fred Kish, Jonathan Kranz, Stephen Nadler, Wallace Wilde Minozzi, Noah Van Sciver, Andrew Mason, Greg Tanner, Garrett Zecker, Craig P. Steffen, Jack Lescamella, Joe Caruso, Paul Karasik, and Michael Janizik for going over and above in their support of the Virtual Memories Show. You have the full list of show supporters at chimeraobscura.com/VM. Our music for this episode is Nothing's Gonna Bring Me Down by David Bayerwald, used with permission from the artist. And that's it for this week's episode of the Virtual Memories Show. Thanks so much for listening. Next week's guest should be the painter, cartoonist, and paintoonist Jerry Moriarty, but we haven't recorded it yet. If that one doesn't happen, we could be out of luck. I added a bunch of other good prospects in the last week or so, like Stanley Bing, Mike Mignola, Peter DeSev, Stephen Heller, and more white guys who will add up to making me feel bad about the gender and ethnic representation of my guests. Still, none of them are lined up for this current week, so let's hope the one with Jerry works out. Until then, you can subscribe to the Virtual Memories Show and download past episodes at the iTunes Store. You can also find all our episodes and get on our email list at either of our websites, vmspod.com or chimeraobscura.com/VM. You can also follow the Virtual Memories Show on Twitter and Instagram at VMSpod, at facebook.com/Virtual Memories Show, at virtualmemoriespodcast.tumblr.com, and on YouTube by searching for Virtual Memories. We're also on tunein.com. Just search for Virtual Memories Show or Gil Roth and you'll find it there. And if you like this podcast, please go to the iTunes Store, look up the Virtual Memories Show, and leave a rating and maybe a review for us. That'll help build a bigger audience. You've been listening to the Virtual Memories Show. I'm your host, Gil Roth, and you are awesome. Keep it that way.